unbelief in men. So it therefore displays and undoes the state of a man's heart. Now let's go to the 10 commandments again. 2 kinds of righteousness is a teaching I did few years ago. It will help anyone who wants to really have more details or exegesis on that subject. A part of the law that, a part of that law is mixed up by many people as 10 commandments, which is not correct. The 10 commandments are different from the law. They are not the same. You know what Jesus calls the law in Matthew 19 is not even the 10 commandments. There was 10 commandments and then 613 laws which Moses gave to the children of Israel. The 10 commandments differs from the law of Moses. So when we say the law of Moses, you need to know what the law of Moses is. And when we say the 10 commandments, you need to know what the 10 commandments are. All right? Because they are not the same. And that's very, very fundamental. Even though the entire Old Testament was called the law, Paul will say, what saith the law? But you must know what the law is. And then don't forget, there's no blanket word for the law. It will be seen within the context in which it is used. So you mustn't generalize. So let's look at it a bit. Exodus chapter 20 from verse 3 to 6. Exodus chapter 20 from verse 3 to 6.
Thou shalt have no other gods before me.
4.
Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth.
Verse 5.
Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the 3rd and 4th generation of them that hate me.
6.
And shewing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. 7. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. For
now,
the Lord...
Now just hold on a minute. You will finish it for me. Just hold on there. If you observe, everything she's reading here is about our relationship with God. Thou shalt not do this. Thou shalt not do this. All is related to God. So read for me again that verse 7.
Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. For the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain.
So in understanding from verse 7 to 10, you will see it was about Sabbath. Read for me verse 8 now.
Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy.
9.
6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work.
10.
But the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates.
Verse 11 now.
For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the 7th day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it.
Now, so we have the Sabbath, we have our relationship with God well taken care of in the verses we read. But why will you tell me to remember God? Why will you tell me not to worship any other God? And then you summarize it by saying, do nothing. Worship no other God. Have no other gods beside me. Don't use my name in vain. Do nothing. The Sabbath. The Sabbath means do nothing. Remember to keep the Sabbath holy. Before this, there is a faith part. But from verse 12 to 17 is your conduct towards men. So from verse 3 to 11 is your relationship with God. And from verse 12 to 17 is your conduct towards men. Which means the 10 commandments is twofold. The 10 commandments is in 2 dimensions. First part, faith in God. Second part, your conduct towards men. The first part, faith towards God. And in your faith towards God, you do nothing. In your faith towards God, you do nothing. Towards men, faith without works is dead. Towards God, you do nothing. Towards man, faith without works is dead. So he put the 10 commandments into form. That's why if you look at it, there is no single punishment mentioned in the 10 commandments. No single punishment at all in the 10 commandments. Faith in God and your conduct towards man is the 10 commandments. Now look at Matthew chapter 5 verse 17 to 18. Let's see what Jesus said about the 10 commandments.
Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill.
Next verse.
For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one title shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled.
So if you observe, there is no human sacrifice as a requirement of the law. So we must ask, what was the obligation of the law? Because we have seen two things that the law will seek to do by looking at the 10 commandments. The first thing that the law will seek to do or seeks to expose is unbelief, what we can call disobedience. The mission of the law is to expose unbelief or to expose man's disobedience towards God. The second thing the law will seek to expose is love or selfishness. Love or selfishness. So two things. The law will expose unbelief and the law will expose selfishness. Jesus now is saying, I have come to fulfill the law. That is, I have come to fulfill the obligation of the law or the demands of the law. There are two folds, which means there is no room for human sacrifice in the law. So when Jesus came to fulfill the law was to bring man to account for two things. The mission of the 612 laws was to bring man to account for two things. Matthew 22 verse 40. Matthew chapter 22 verse number 40, where Jesus gives us a clearer explanation of what he started doing in Matthew chapter 5. Read for me.
On these two commandments hang all the laws and the prophets.
On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Look at Matthew 22 36. Matthew 22 verse 36.
Master, which is the great commandment in the law?
Which is the great commandment of the law? The word great commandment of the law, there is the word megas. Megas in the Greek. What is the great about the commandment of the law? Megas. Look at Matthew 22, 37 and 38 now. Matthew 22, 37 and 38.
Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind.
Next verse.
This is the first and great commandment.
This is the first and megas commandment. He said, Thou shalt love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul. The first, the Greek word proton. This is the first. That means this is what you build on. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, with all your might. All right, this is the first, the proton. This is the foundation on which you will build other things on. When he said, Thou shalt love the Lord your God with all your heart, did you notice that there is no action to this at all? No action. There's no action whatsoever. Just love the Lord your God. He didn't say you will do this, you will do it. Just said you love the Lord your God. No action. With all your heart, the word kadia. With all your mind, with all your soul. Now, with all your mind, there is the same word for suche. Your mind, suche. P-S-U-C-H-E. He used that word, in the book of Ephesians chapter 4, verse 18. Ephesians 4:18.
Having the understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God through the ignorance that is in them because of the blindness of their heart.
Because of the blind. Now remember, the law was to find unbelief. So after he said this, he now gave laws. So the law was to condemn the absence of what we just said now. Moses gave the law because the people were not loving the Lord with all their heart, with all their soul. So he gave them the law to condemn their unbelief, because he knew they couldn't keep it at all. Now, the 10 Commandments is not what condemns. With all your heart. So the issue is the heart of man. And we know that was, where faith will be found. And that is where unbelief will also be found. So the issue in the 10 Commandments is faith and love. Now look at Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 30 verse 12. Deuteronomy chapter 30 verse number 12.
It is not in heaven that thou shouldest say, who shall go up for us to heaven and bring it unto us, that we may hear it and do it?
Some people mix it up. They think, well, so since we don't keep the laws anymore, we don't have to love the Lord. But the loving the Lord is actually not in the law of Moses, it's in the 10 Commandments. And some people feel, well, since we don't keep the law anymore, then we don't have to honor our parents. Well, honoring your parents is not in the laws of Moses, it's in the 10 Commandments. So that means if the 10 Commandments is faith towards God and love towards man, it means the 10 Commandments is actually fully operational today in the believer. Deuteronomy chapter 30 verse 10 to 16. And I'm going to show you how Brother Paul preached that same message that Moses preached in Deuteronomy in the book of Romans. Read for me chapter 30 from verse 10 to 16.
If thou shalt hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to keep his commandments and his statutes, which are written in this book of the law, and if thou turn unto the Lord thy God with all thine heart and with all thy soul.
Next verse.
For this commandment which I command thee this day, it is not hidden from thee, neither is it far off.
Next verse.
It is not in heaven that thou shouldest say, who shall go up for us to heaven and bring it unto us, that we may hear it and do it?
Next verse.
Neither is it beyond the sea that thou shouldest say, who shall go over the sea for us and bring it unto us, that we may hear it and do it?
14.
But the word is very nigh unto thee in thy mouth and in thy heart, that thou mayest do it.
Next verse.
See, I have set before thee this day life and good, and death and evil.
16.
In that I command thee this day to love the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commandments and his statutes and his judgments, that thou mayest live and multiply, and the Lord thy God shall bless thee in the land whither thou goest to possess it.
So this is how to love the Lord thy God. You believe in your heart and speak with your mouth. Love the Lord your God. You're not required to do anything. Believe in your heart, speak with your mouth. That's how to love the Lord your God. You believe the gospel in your heart, you speak with your mouth. That is how to love the Lord your God. Now look at the way Brother Paul will put it in Romans chapter 10. Romans chapter 10 from verse 1 to 3. Romans chapter 10 from verse 1 to 3.
Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved.
Next verse.
For I bear them record that they have a zeal of God, but not according to knowledge.
Verse 3.
For they, being ignorant of God's righteousness, and going about to establish their own righteousness, have not submitted themselves unto the righteousness of God.
Brethren, my heart's desire for Israel is that they might be saved. They are not saved, but they are very religious. They are full of zeal, they are full of works, but they are not saved. They don't love the Lord. Because they have not believed in their heart and they have not confessed with their mouth. They are busy doing everything, but everything they are doing is not what the Lord requires. They have a zeal of God, but that zeal, that passion, that activity is not according to knowledge. Now this is Brother Paul. So he now moves to verse 4 after setting the foundation for what he wants to discuss. Give me verse 4.
For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone that believeth.
Christ is the end of the law. You don't come to Christ and want to add anything to what Christ has done. He is the end of it all. Then verse 5 now. Oh, I love this.
For Moses describeth the righteousness which is of the law, that the man which doeth those things shall live by them.
The righteousness of the law is about doing something. The man that doeth shall live by them. So there is the righteousness of the law, which is about doing something. That is why the 613 laws are about doing something, doing something, doing something, doing something. So Moses makes a distinction. If you do those things, you will live by them. Okay, and he lists all those things in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. But now look at verse 6, the distinction. Romans chapter 10, verse number 6.
But the righteousness which is of faith speaketh on this wise: Say not in thine heart, who shall ascend into heaven? That is to bring Christ down from above.
Next verse.
Or who shall descend into the deep? That is to bring up Christ again from the dead.
Next verse.
But what saith it? The word is nigh thee, even in thy mouth and in thy heart. That is the word of faith which we preach.
Next verse.
That if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, and shalt believe in thine heart that God had raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved.
That is how to love the Lord thy God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. So Moses offered the children of Israel life and death. Now let me ask you a question. What Brother Paul is preaching here in Romans chapter 10, did Moses preach it to the children of Israel in Deuteronomy chapter 30? So the same thing preached to us today was preached unto them, but they never mixed faith because they were doing everything to qualify and did not believe in their heart to confess with their mouth. And there are many people even today who have rejected just to confess and believe, and they are busy doing things to qualify. They have fallen in the category of the people, the audience of Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 30. The righteousness of the law is about doing something. The righteousness of faith speaketh on this wise: Say not in your heart, who shall raise Christ from the dead? Say not in your heart, who shall bring him from heaven? But what saith it? The word is nigh thee, in your heart and in your mouth. That is the word of faith which we preach.